Amen. You can be seated. Turn with me to Genesis chapter 31. And if you want to, when you open it up, look how many verses is in that thing. Just a few. Just a few. Not to scare you off, but there's a lot of verses. But it's very good. And I say very good. What I mean is, when we are looking here, even as we've been going through Genesis, we can look at Jacob, how God has chosen to work through him. Remember, he met him in the desert when he was fleeing because he did this bad thing. He deceived his father. Now we see how he's experienced it himself. I think many times the things we do to others, if we experience it ourselves, you think it would change our heart and our minds. And we can see here in Jacob's life how he's now experiencing the same thing he did to his brother. He's experiencing it as his uncle, tricks him, deceives him, lies to him, and uses him. And then realize how long it had been, and we're going to see he's been there at Laban's house for 20 years. You remember why he left his homeland, the promised land, to go to Haran where his uncle was, because of what he did and wanting his brother to cool off. I don't know how you cool off from that. He stole his birthright. 20 years is a long time. But let's begin by just reading Genesis chapter 31, and let's look at verses 1 through 3. Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, what sons were saying? Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all his wealth from what belonged to our father. And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude towards him was not what it had been. Then the Lord said to Jacob, "Go back to the land of your fathers and your relatives, and I will be with you." Now think back just one chapter a few years back. Laban had begged Jacob to stay. You remember, it was probably around the 14-year mark when he had fulfilled his duty for his second wife, Rachel, which he wanted in the first place. He ended up marrying Leah because she was the oldest. Not really because she was the oldest, but that was his excuse. Basically, his uncle lied to him. So after the 14 years, he was going to leave, and he said, "What do you want? What do you want me to pay you?" And they came upon this agreement, and we're going to see the results of this. And you guys remember why Laban wanted Jacob to stay. You guys remember why? God had blessed Jacob, and the fruits of that, we see Laban increased in wealth. His sheep grew. As Jacob took care of his flock, it began to increase. So we see from the very beginning, the first time we met Laban, you remember how he was, from the very beginning, it was all about himself. And everything that he's done, as you look at it, it was all about himself. Even when it came to his own daughters. Isn't that amazing? It didn't matter if it was family. He still used them to get what he wanted. But now we see Laban's attitude has changed. He's probably thinking, man, I shouldn't have made that deal. Because from that point forward, I believe Laban's flock began to decrease. Because he said, well, the agreement we're going to see, we're reminded of what it was. Every sheep that has a stripe on it, a spot on it, that had a deformity on it, on its fur, that Jacob would get it. But as we learn, that began to happen. And Laban began to change the rules. Okay, now I don't want the streak. It has to have streaks and 2 spots. But we're going to see that it didn't matter what he said, because God was before Jacob, blessing him. But now Jacob hears Laban's sons complaining. He has taken my father's wealth. And so from that conversation, he's learning that Laban's heart has changed towards him. No longer does he really want him around. In essence, he's probably wanting to get rid of him. Because now, as he watches, can you imagine this? He wanted Jacob around so he can continue to increase. But from that point forward, Jacob began to increase and he began to decrease. And he's watching this. So he's thinking, I need to cut my losses. So after he overhears this complaining from Laban's sons, he sees the writing on the wall. Wouldn't you? If you heard Laban's son saying, hey, he's taken everything that he has, he's basically taken it from my father. It was an agreement, but now they're looking at it as, he's stealing from me. Let's go ahead and read the next couple verses. Genesis chapter 31, verse 4. So Jacob sent word to Rachel and Leah to come out to the fields where his flocks were. He said to them, I see that your father's attitude toward me is not what it was before. But the God of my father has been with me. You know that I've worked for your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. However, God has not allowed him to harm me. If he said, the speckled ones will be your wages, then all the flock gave birth to the speckled ones. Can you imagine being Laban? Okay, I got you now. They all have to be speckled. And the next day or next week comes out and they're all speckled. No matter what he changed, however he changed it, God would cause them to be born that way. He says, then the speckled ones will be your wages. Then all the flocks gave birth to the speckled ones. And if he said, the streaked ones will be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked ones. Now, Laban knows the reason why he kept Jacob around, because he saw and knew that his God was blessing him. So now why is he surprised that God is blessing Jacob himself? So when Jacob learns about this attitude change, what does he do? He goes to his wives and he begins to discuss the issue. In other words, getting counsel from his wives, which is important. He goes to them and he explains to them that he's seeing this change in their father's heart towards him. But Jacob says he's always known. If you heard all throughout here, we're going to hear Jacob says, I know that God has protected me. The only reason he hasn't harmed me up to this point, because God is for me. And God is taking care of me. And now not only is God taking care of me, God is multiplying my wealth. Knowing that he's going to return me to the promised land, but he's not going to return me empty-handed. Because up to that point, before they made that deal, 14 years have passed, and you know what Jacob had? 2 wives, some children, no property, nothing. He basically served his uncle Laban, and Laban is the one that became very wealthy. But what's very interesting, as I was just telling you, what God did was, you could say, is impossible. If someone, put yourself in Jacob's shoes. He makes this deal, streaked, spotted lambs. This is the ones that I'll get. I'll take these out. And then Laban comes and changes it. Makes it very impossible. Okay, you got to have a combination of stripes and dots. And it happens. What we see is God just did the impossible. Wouldn't you say that's impossible? 10 times, not just once. I'm just trying to think of all the combinations. It's got to have the tic-tac-toe symbol on there, and the O's have to win. And he wakes up, there you go. Wouldn't that freak you out? Wouldn't that make you stop and say, I need to leave this man alone? But the world sees that God moving, but it doesn't stop them, does it? Because the darkness of their minds and their hearts are so hardened, because it doesn't benefit them. All they see is, I don't care if God is real, it doesn't benefit me. Just like the Pharisees, when they saw Jesus, they saw all these miracles, and what did they do? You can't heal on Sunday, on the Sabbath. Really? You missed the whole healing part? That's how hard their hearts were. So we see Jacob's flocks grew and grew, but not so with Laban. So Laban's flocks began to decrease in the same proportion as Jacob's grew. Let's go ahead and look at the next few verses. Verse 9. So God has taken away. Again, he's speaking to his wives, Rebekah and Leah, and he's saying, so God has taken away your father's livestock and has given them to me. So you see the picture of decreasing and increasing. You can see the son's point. It's like, everything we had is now over here. But it's still the agreement. In breeding season, I once had a dream. You remember earlier how he went about taking a piece of stick and carved the bark off of it, threw it in the water, and when it was breeding season, they would breed in front of that, and they got streaked and spotted. How's that even possible? Anyone here work with animals? You ever hear of that technique? No. Here's why. He said, I had a dream in which I looked up and saw that the male goats mating with the flock were streaked, speckled, and spotted. The angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob. I answered him, here I am. And he said, look up and see that all the male goats mating with the flock are streaked, speckled, or spotted. Here's why. He goes, for I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. Many times we see what the wicked is doing and we're thinking, God, where are you? He sees everything. In the end, he will righteously, he will deal with it according to his timetable. He's telling him here that I've seen that all he's been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and go back to your native land. Again, God is the one who blessed Jacob, and because Jacob worked for Laban, again, Laban has been blessed. Laban has become increased greatly in wealth. He's become rich. But here, think about this. Here's what's really going on. God is the one that gave that increase. Laban is just a caretaker of what God has given to Jacob. The whole time that he's becoming wealthy, God is preparing that for Jacob anyway. That's what God's plan was. But Laban, he doesn't serve God. As you're going to see later, he serves his own idols. So at this whole time, God gives the increase. And that's the thing we got to keep in mind. When God gives you increase, it's his. And when he takes it away or he gives it to someone else or has you help someone else, remember, it's his. We need to stop moaning and groaning about it when it's his. Especially when it comes to money. It's like, you really want me to give 10% or some here? It's like, that's a little bit from what I've given you. All that you have, I've given you. And all that Laban had was from God. She said, the angel of the Lord spoke in this dream. And he shows them again the streaked, the spotted, and the speckled sheep. And basically saying, God knows that Laban has cheated you. But remember, God works out all things for his purpose, doesn't he? For good. So he's showing Jacob that what he's showing him in this dream is that I will give you these sheep. That's what he's telling him. And I believe probably it appears, even though it's not written, but it seems conveyed here, that that's where Jacob got this weird idea to carve the stick and throw it in the water and breed. I mean, you look at it just like, how's that even? What if he put 2 sticks in there? Was it going to be? It seems weird, but many times, doesn't God ask us to do some things that make no sense at all? Because it shows basically what happens. You can't realistically figure out how it was done. Because really it had nothing to do with the sticks. Basically, it was God doing it. He was just having him obey him. So when God tells you to do something that's weird, I mean, it's not going to be against his word. Just do it. You may not understand it. Has God ever told you to do something? It's like, I don't get it, God. He didn't say you got to get it. He says, you got to do it. And sometimes, as we get past it, we're able to look back and see what he's did. And sometimes we don't. But I want to give you some application right here. It is good to remember, because at the end he says he remembered. You remember where God met Jacob in the desert when he was fleeing his brother Esau? This is where Jacob's life changed, meeting God. It is good to remember times and places where the Lord did great works for us and met us in wonderful ways. As we remember them, God reminds us he is still the same God who met our needs and then wants to meet our needs now. We need to look back as he's met our needs, because have you noticed when things get difficult and then God meets your needs and you find yourself in another situation, you're like, where are you, God? He's like, remember, I always meet your needs. Look back to those times. God told Jacob to go back to Bethel, back to the place where he first encountered the Lord in a personal way. And I think he needs to go back there, because think of 20 years living in that wicked environment. It's got to have affected him. Living among pagan religions, pagan idols. Hopefully, as we see, he stays strong and serves the Lord because he obeys him. And the last part of this application, by him going back to Bethel, was Jacob's way of returning to his first love and his first works described in Revelation chapter 2. He calls us, go back to your first love. Do you guys remember that? When you first accepted Jesus Christ and you could care less who thought you were weird. You wanted to tell them. And you didn't matter how much you knew, because nowadays, as you get older as a Christian, it's, well, I don't know enough to go out to the parks. I don't know enough to tell someone about Jesus. You don't need to know enough. You just need to know what he did for you in your heart, how he changed you. You guys remember how he changed you, right? How he forgave you of your sins. I remember, I said, I can't believe he forgave me of all the things that I've already done. And the things that, knowing that I'm not perfect, I'm going to do more dumb things. But I remember that. And he returns. It's almost like when we come to church on Sundays and Wednesdays, you can meet God anywhere, and you should be in his presence always, seeking him. But he's given this special place, the church, to come together, to encourage each other. We need to encourage each other. That's why we want this environment. When we come in, we harass you a little. That's love. but we want to show love and kindness. And many times you come in here, if someone says, how are you doing? You say, oh, it's good. Sometimes we just say that as just to be saying it. If there's something going on in your life and you're down and out or struggling, talk to someone in the church. Say, pray with me. Come to me, I'll pray with you. Pastor Fred, anyone here will take the time to pray with you. Let's go ahead and look at the next couple of verses. Verses 14 through 16. So he's told his wives, and now let's see what they say. Then Rachel and Leah replied. Now remember, he's talking about their father. You can see daughters can get on the defensive or even the offensive when you start talking about their dads. Then Rachel and Leah replied, do we still have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate? Does he not regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he has used us up. He has used up what was paid for us. Remember the dowry that was given? The 7 years for each one is like a dowry. It's all gone. Surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children. So do whatever God has told you. So he goes to his wives to get counseling, to let them know what's going on, because it's going to affect them. And knowing that it's their father. So basically what his wives are saying is, our father has not treated us like daughters. Laban has treated his daughters like property because he sold Leah off as he deceived Jacob so that he could get Jacob to stay for another 7 years. So because he did that, he caused the conflict. He didn't care about the conflict that was going to come. He married both of his daughters to the same husband. Now, you think that's going to be an issue? Man, you have enough. I have 2 daughters. It's enough for them to be in the same house sometimes, but to marry them off to one husband, that's another reason. One husband, one wife. That's it. You can see in this relationship. You remember how we went through it? Was there not constant conflict between them? It was like a constant competition. And each one, what is really bad? They were both striving for the love of Jacob. So Jacob's wives respond, they treat us like property. Do what God has told you. He's heard from God. He's got it confirmed through his wives. What happens next? What does he do next? Let's look at verse 17 to 21. Then Jacob put his children and his wives on camels, and he drove all his livestock ahead of him, along with all the goods he had accumulated in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. When Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods. Moreover, Jacob deceived Laban, the Aramean, by not telling him he was running away. Now, we know right here, the scriptures is telling us he deceived Laban. Has he not learned? Well, we're going to find out in a minute why he does this, because we can relate to why. Not justifying it, but we can see why. So he fled with all he had, crossed the Euphrates River, and headed for the hill country of Gilead. So here's what's happened. Jacob hears from God in a dream. He gets encouragement and he gets a direction. And then he seeks counsel from his wives. And then what does he do next? Now here's what I'm looking at yourself. You seek God, you hear from God, you get counsel from wise people in the church, from other brothers and sisters in Christ. You get confirmation. What do you do next? You take action. But you got to make sure it's the right action, because what we're going to see, Jacob skipped a step. Jacob packs up his family and livestock and heads out towards his home that he had been away from 20 years. Remember, his mother sent him out. He says, just go away until your brother Esau is no longer angry at you. Now, what was his mother's name? I get Rachel, and it starts with R too. Rebecca? One of those. His mother loved him over Esau. You remember? I keep saying remember a lot. His dad loved Esau. When she told him to go away, she did not know that she would never see him again. And you know, he's missing home. 20 years have passed. So Jacob, he really seems to be listening to God. But what is he doing wrong? He leaves without telling his father-in-law Laban. And he's trying to sneak away. Why is he doing that? Why is he trying to sneak away? Let me give you from David Guzik put this commentary about it. He says, here's what's already conspired. Here's what's already happened. God already told Jacob to go. And he says, I'm going to give you this promised land. And think about it. Up to this point, God has protected Jacob. And now God is telling him to go, so he needs to trust him. But here's what's happened. Jacob fears. He has fear. He deceives and departs. By departing in this manner, it's showing that he fears Laban. Now you can think, well, maybe so. He knows what Laban's going to do. But that's not the right thing to do. You need to go tell him, to be straight up and be honest with him. But it showed that he had lack in confidence in God. Isn't that what it shows? That's why the title of this is, Your Actions Will Reveal What You Truly Believe. What you really believe in your action. You can say whatever you want, but your actions will show. So did he totally trust God? No. Why fear man? If God is for you, what does he say? Who can be against you? That sounds pretty cool when you say it, doesn't it? But do you believe it? I mean, I love to say those things, but do you believe that? Instead, he relies upon, here's where we falter. We rely on our own wisdom. My wisdom would be like, you know what? I'm not going back to Laban because I know what he's going to do. He's going to try to talk me out of it. He's going to cheat me. And next thing you know, I'm going to be here for another 14 years. So in the world of wisdom, that sounds like the right thing to just go. So he fled instead of telling Laban, instead of trusting God and then leaving. Let's go ahead and look at the next few verses. Now really, as we're looking at it, doesn't it really sound like Jacob was listening to God? He was doing what he said. But we see how fear of man. Verse 22 says, on the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. Taking his relatives with him, he pursued Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him on the hill country of Gilead. Then God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream at night and said to him, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. So here's what happens. Jacob leaves. 3 days later, it's like, man, these people are apparently not close, huh? But they did remember when they had separated their sheep, their flock 3 days apart? So he didn't hear any news that he had left till 3 days later. And when he hears this, he gets his family together, more than likely his sons. They get all together and they begin to pursue Jacob. Now looking at Laban's response, you think Laban was a little upset? A little bit? Pursues him for 7 days. I mean, after a couple of days, if you weren't, man, that dude is really mad. 7 days and he's still going. I'm going to get him, no matter what it takes. Sometimes we do that, right? We just go, I don't care, I'm going to get even. Even if I lose everything, you're going to get yours, what you deserve. But here's what happens. With his anger in his heart, he apparently has enough power, enough people to wipe Jacob out. But here's where God comes in. Remember we said God's protecting him? God comes into a dream and he speaks to Laban. Does Laban serve the true and living God? He doesn't. He speaks to a pagan, whatever you want to call it, one that doesn't believe in God. He speaks, and he can speak to anyone. So he speaks to him in a dream, and he warns him. He says not to say anything good or bad. Basically, he's saying, be careful how you speak to him and how you deal with him. Do you think he heeds this warning? Do you think he just because he didn't serve God, do you think God couldn't put his fear in him? We're going to find out here in a second. But here's one thing I want to point out. Because God had to deliver this message to him, it shows you Laban's intentions, doesn't it? If God had to intervene, many times when God does this, he does it for a reason. Like Paul, he had to encourage him. Well, why did he encourage him? Well, because he was discouraged. So Laban's intent was, I'm going to get this guy, and probably was going to kill him. Because he has no need for him now. You guys know that, right? He's not making any wealth off of Jacob anymore. And he's seeing basically all that he has, and we're going to see, this is his heart. Everything that Jacob has is mine. Isn't that the way the wicked works? Even though they made this deal, they agreed upon it, he didn't like the outcome of it. So now he's going to say, that's still mine. I don't care if I gave it to you. So, well, I was going to leave that phrase out. You know, we've used that phrase, Indian giver. I don't even know where that comes from. He said, I gave it to you, now you want to take it back. Let's look at the next few verses, 25 to 30. Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country of Gilead. Remember, he's got a huge entourage. He's got a bunch of animals and family and kids. the country of Gilead, when Laban overtook him, and Laban and his relatives camped there too. So at this point, Jacob was not far from the Jordan River. He was almost to the promised land. So he's been driving pretty hard and pretty fast. But so has Laban, maybe apparently faster, or he had a smaller group. It shows that he moved quickly. And Laban was determined to go as far as it took. Isn't it amazing how far we go to take revenge? We'll go to the uttermost ends of the earth to inflict, to pay back. Verse 26, then Laban said to Jacob, what have you done? You deceived me. I'm like, when I read this guy, I'm like, really? I mean, you deceived him for 20 years. What have you done, Jacob? You've deceived me and you've carried off my daughters like captives in war. Why did you run off secretly and deceive me? Why didn't you tell me? Listen to this. This is, you got to listen to this guy. So I could send you away with joy and singing. Yeah, that's a lie right there. To the music of timbrels and harps. You didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren and my daughters goodbye. You have done a foolish thing. So what I see here is typical Laban. He lays it on really thick. He's trying to guilt him, right? Put this guilt trip on him. I can't believe you did this to me. You should have just simply told me. You should have told me and I could have kissed my daughters. He treated them like property. I could have kissed my daughters and my grandchildren. I would have sent you off joyfully. Do you believe Laban would have allowed Jacob to leave in this manner? If Jacob had simply went to him and told him. Just like before, he would try to talk him out of it. He would try to trick him out of it. Remember, God is for Jacob, so he would have went and he would have left anyway, but in better circumstances. But I don't think Laban was going to be singing Kumbaya. I'm glad to, all right, we're all, no. Isn't that the way the world works? Deception. To the bitter end, they continue to lie to you. Let's look at verse 29. Now listen to this statement that he makes. This really shows you his heart. He says, I have the power to harm you. But, think about this. I have the power to harm you. You should probably pause. I have the power to wipe you out, to kill every one of you and take my family, my daughters, my children, all that livestock. I can take it back. But I have a little problem. Just a little problem. Last night, the God of your father said to me, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. Now you have gone off because you long to return to your father's household. I have the power to harm you, but your God that you serve, that I know has blessed you, that's why I'm rich. I've seen him work in your life. Isn't it important that the world sees God working in our lives? Because of that, I'm not going to do any of that. I don't serve him, but he scared me to death. Think of his attitude. Why it had to put, as they say, the fear of God in him. Because he says, I'm going to change my mind. It's kind of interesting. He's actually being honest and telling him, here's what happened. This is the only reason I'm not taking your life and your stuff, because your God intervened. You can see Jacob just praising God then. Yeah, I should have trusted him. I think in our own lives, when we don't trust God and we do it in our own way, God still does what he's going to do. And then we look back and wish I would have just trusted him. And that's where we got to ask him, change me so that I can totally trust you. It takes time and growing in him to be able to just trust him. There's so many things that we think we trust God in, but when we look at our actions, we try to use our own wisdom. Now, there's nothing wrong with using our wisdom, but we need to seek God and we need to trust him. Let's look at verse 30. The second part of verse 30 says, I like this part. But why did you steal my gods? Jacob answered Laban, I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force. So now he's telling him, Laban addressed the first issue. His first issue is him leaving. So Jacob answers that. I left because I was afraid you would wipe me out. And it really sounds like that was his plan. Now then, Jacob addresses the second thing that's really just getting him. He's like, okay, I can understand this. I can even see in his own mind, you're serving this God. Why are you taking my gods? That'd be pretty wimpy gods that you could just carry them off. I can't find God. Someone took him. Let me go back to the first question. Why did he leave? Because he feared Laban. Here's your application. If you're going to write this down, application for this. Proverbs chapter 29, verse 25 says, fearing people is a dangerous trap, but trusting the Lord means safety. If you truly trust Him, it's going to be seen in your actions. But it's also saying in this proverb that if you fear people, you're setting a trap for yourself, because you're going to do things that you shouldn't be doing. Simply saying, trust God, don't fear man. So there's your application there. Even though, things drive me crazy. Even though everything he believes about Laban is true, and we see it come true, he was going to kill him. But yet God already said, go, I'm going to deliver you. Doesn't God tell us some stuff clearly? I'm going to do this for you. Just obey me. And yet we still fear man. Let me give you one example. I think we met that guy Victor Marks up at the Berlin conference. Can you imagine him? God said, go to Iraq. Right in the middle when ISIS is huge, he was there. He has a house there. And matter of fact, he wanted me to let you guys know the property's really cheap over there. He says, if you guys want to buy some. I'm thinking, I don't think so. But he has a home there. And they go get little kids that they've taken, bring them back, and try to reunite them with their family. But look at that situation. I can see the logic of fearing those people. But see, God told him to go. Plus, God gave him some good skills that he can take care of himself. But if they were to come against him, they could take him out. But see, God has opened these doors. That's a great example today. So apply that to your life. God's telling you to do something, and you fear something. Well, if I do this, let's put it simple. If I do this, I could lose my job. Stand up for God in this situation in your work. Don't go along with this. Well, if I do that, then I'm going to lose my job. And he's going to say, did I not give you that job in the first place? Trust me. Verse 32. So here's the second question. Why have you taken my idols? And Jacob responds, but if you find anyone who has your gods, that person shall not live. In the presence of our relatives, see for yourself whether there's anything of yours here with me. If so, take it. In other words, you can search everything I have. It's not here. Now, little did Jacob know that his wife Rachel had stolen the gods. So Laban went into Jacob's tents, into Leah's tent, and into the tent of the two female servants, but he found nothing. After he came out of Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them inside her camel saddle and was sitting on them. Man, she sounds like somebody I know. Oh, it's Laban. That's her dad. She apparently learned some tricks from him, huh? So Laban searched through every tent but found nothing. And Rachel's sitting there. He's probably saying, he apparently must be asking her to get down. She says to her father, don't be angry, my lord. I cannot stand up in your presence. I am having my period. So he searched but could not find the household gods. He's like, okay, walks away. To me, I'm trying to look at that situation. It's there. You think that dude would be smart enough, okay, she's hiding it. He's looked everywhere and cannot find it. But she comes up with this excuse. Now think about this. Jacob is saying, whoever is taking it, if anyone has taken your idols, we're going to put them to death. He didn't realize that he was basically calling down a curse upon his own wife because she did something that she shouldn't have done. So that shows you where Rachel's at too. Maybe she believes in God, but she's still holding on to the idols and stuff that her father has taught. So it's going to be good for her to leave with Jacob and go back to Jacob's family that serve the true and living God, to separate themselves from that because they've had an influence on her. And parents have great influences on their kids no matter when they become adults, don't they? You know, I was telling you the other day, I was talking to my dad, and I don't tell him anything really important, serious, just chit-chat about dumb stuff, work and stuff like that. But I told him something I think that he needs to do to reconcile a relationship. And when he replied to me, I was thinking, man, I felt like I was 12 years old again. Just the way they can talk to you. It's like, really, I never thought that was possible because I can take him out now. I'm like, I can take you out. But when he said that, I was like, I felt, man, I'm back home again. I'm like, oh, never mind. So you can see how if you have that influence, sometimes that some kind of separation has to happen there. Like, I'm going to serve God, and you do what you got to do. Because many times, if they're serving religion, they want you to stay in that religion. But you can live an example. They'll see the change. Because anyone that's living in religion has no peace, has no joy. They just know this is what I've been taught. So Rachel hid these idols in the camel seat where she sat, made an excuse. He bought it. And again, the nut doesn't fall far from the tree. She is slick just like he is. Oh, Dad, I'm feeling really bad. If it's okay with you, I don't want to make you angry, but I'm not going to get down. Oh, okay. And sure enough, he believes it. Verse 36. Now, again, Jacob has no clue what she's done. It says, Jacob was angry and took Laban to task. I'm going to explain that to you in a little bit, what that means to take to task. What is my crime, he asked Laban. How have I wronged you that you hunt me down? Now that you have searched through all my goods, what have you found that belongs to your household? Put it here in front of your relatives and mine. Let them judge between the two of us. Now, he's emboldened now because he can find anything. If you found something, bring it here. I have been with you for 20 years now. 20 years. Your sheep and goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams from your flock. I did not bring you animals torn by the wild beasts. I bore the loss. In other words, even though he had been tricked, deceived, played, he still served him 100%. And God still blessed Jacob. He says, no matter what, if an animal came and destroyed one of your goats and I was responsible to take care of them, he can control that. But he says, I paid for it. In other words, I did a good job for you while I was working for you. I think that encourages, no matter how your boss treats you, unfairly. You may think, I can take this or that because they treat me unfairly. It doesn't justify stealing. And I hate this part. Some people say, it's taking a pencil or staples home. It's just this little thing. Is it yours? No, I don't even want to hear that because how many have you guys taken? I need staples. I got cases of them. I did not bring you animals torn by the beasts. I bore the loss myself. And you demanded payment. Not only did he do it, he demanded it. He didn't get any special favors being his son-in-law. Of course, his daughters didn't get any special favors either, did they? Any special treatment. He says, I demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by day or night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the day. Now you see him kind of getting a little teary-eyed here. The heat consumed me. It was rough. He's like, man, it was in the daytime and the cold at night, and sleep fled from my eyes. I worked when it was hot. I worked when it was cold, and I didn't get to sleep much. It was like this for 20 years. So he's describing, this sounds like a horrible 20 years. Now think about why he's there. You deceived your father. Kind of getting a little payback there, seems. I worked for you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flocks. And you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, now here's the part where you can hear some truth here. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toils of my hand, and last night he rebuked you. He's saying, yeah, I knew that dream. He rebuked you because you're chasing me down. All the stuff that I'm leaving with, it's mine. God gave it to me. He says, I would have left empty-handed. If it was up to you, I would have left just me. Packing for 20 years, serving you, you've grown in great wealth, you just send me. But God's got my back. I'm trusting him. And he says, and also the second accusation, you accuse me of stealing your idols. Did you find them? Can you see him? This guy is just red hot. Why is that? Think about this. 20 years of being cheated, lied, and manipulated. It comes to a head and the volcanoes exploded all over Laban. Laban's kind of wishing he had found those idols now. But that just brought everything, 20 years of this to head, and he explodes all over Laban. But at the end of, I see it as ranting and raving. I just see Jacob going crazy. He finally lets it out. But he acknowledges at the end of this rant that it's God who kept him safe and provided for all his needs. He says, if it wasn't for God, I would have nothing. I would be out here by myself. Matter of fact, if it wasn't for God, I'd probably be dead. So at least after this anger, he's acknowledging the only reason I'm blessed is because of God. Let's go ahead and look at the next couple of verses, 43 to 44. Okay, so he's exploded, you know what I like to call verbal vomit all over Laban. He's covered with this stuff. And Laban answers. The women, I listen to the boldness of this. He says, these women are my daughters. These children are my children. And these flocks, they're my flocks. All you see is mine. Man, this guy is bold. Again, he has enough people with him to take Jacob out. Yet, what can I do about these daughters of mine? See, this is a little bit different. He's saying, what can I do? These are my daughters. These are my children that you have borne me. Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it serve as a witness between us. So basically, he responds arrogantly. Everything that you have, everything is mine. The sheep that we made a deal with, it came out of my flock, so the way he looks at it, it's still mine. My daughters, you worked 7 years for each one. That was the dowry. They're still mine. It's like, well, that's the way the world thinks. It's a fair deal, but in the end, they're going to cheat you. But then Laban does something that is uncharacteristic of him. He says, basically what he's saying, I give these, everything I just told you, I'll give you all these possessions. The wives, he's saying, I'm giving you what's already yours. Wouldn't that kind of tick you off a little bit? Everything that you have, that is mine, I'm going to give it to you. He says, let's make a peace agreement so that we're at peace with each other, as long as we don't cross this boundary. They're going to make this pillar, and here's what it's really saying. We're going to make this pillar to remind us, it's like a marker, it's a boundary. We're going to have peace with each other as long as I don't cross it that way, and you don't cross it this way. In other words, if you cross this line, I'm going to kill you. And the agreement's over. So, we're going to leave in peace is kind of a misnomer, huh? We're going to leave it here. And you think it was out of love for his children? He says, you know what? All this is mine. But you know what? I'm just going to show this. I'm going to be the bigger man. No. He remembers the dream. Whatever God told him took hold. If I lay hands on you and wipe you out, if that's even possible, my life's over. Because whatever God showed him in the dream, he's not going to do any harm to Laban. Isn't that amazing? That's the God you serve. If he says, I will protect you, if he tells you to go somewhere, trust him and do it. I mean, I could talk myself out of anything. Well, if I go there, this is going to happen, or this is going to happen. I go to work, if I do this, this guy's going to whatever, fire me. And God says, I told you to do that, trust me. Stop trying to second guess, or stop trying to use your own wisdom when God directs you. Do you guys know sometimes, most of the time when God tells you to do something, can you figure that out? When God's saying do this? Sometimes it's hard. But then you still got to step out if you believe he's telling you something. But have you ever heard God tell you something? And I can example for myself, and I know it's happened to you. Because I'm just going to say you guys agree with me that it's happened to you when I tell you. You're in Walmart. You're tired. You're just there. You ever go in Walmart just to get in and out? Everybody you know is there. And then God wants you to talk to somebody. Hey, go talk to that person. I mean, he's not telling you to go 2 rows down. I've done that. I've skipped 2 rows down, and guess what? They're there. So, you guys, have you ever done that? You ever saw someone, he's like, I don't feel like talking to him? Any of you guys? Lawrence, help me out here. You ever done it? Just me. I have a hard heart. Lord, please help me. There you go. Sometimes you're tired, but he's saying go, and I clearly knew that he was telling me to talk to them. Or someone has a flat tire on the side of the road. I'm always in a hurry. It's like, really, God, send someone to help them as you drive by. That's it. He pointed it out for you to stop. So now, at the end of this chapter, Laban and Jacob part ways just as God wanted it to be. God wanted him 20 years. He's preparing him to lead like he wants him to. Up to this point, before he came to Haran, to his uncle's place, he was a deceptive person. He listened to the influence of his own mother. And that's another point. Think about this. He listened to his mother. His mother was the one that planned it, but he listened to it. You can't just say, hey, God, I'm sorry about stealing or robbing that bank because he planned it. I just went along with it. My mother told me to do it. But now that he's coming back, his mother is no longer alive. She's out of the picture. He's learned many lessons. Do you think he's learned lessons from 20 years of how not to treat someone? And matter of fact, when someone does you wrong, and this has happened to me in the past, I realize and I've learned from it and say, I'm not going to lead like that. I've experienced different leadership that I don't like. Like, I've been under a leader that leads with authoritative leadership. I hate that. There's so many things I want to tell you that I've experienced that I still haven't forgot. But what I've learned from that is I'm not going to lead that way. Or you can tell someone, I'm not going to treat someone like that because I know how bad it made me feel. So in this sense, we know he's learned. So I'm going to end with another application here in the end. We've seen in Jacob's case, in Laban's case, selfishness, self-seeking, greed, and deception may appear to pay off. Look at wicked people. We look, man, these guys are successful in this world. But in the long term, they will be left with nothing. They will be empty and they will be unfulfilled. Many people become rich because they stepped on, hurt people, destroyed people, but they get there and they're not content. They're not fulfilled. And if that's not enough, if they don't repent, they will face God's judgment. And again, sometimes that sounds like, whoa, that guy needs judgment. And you're thinking, that's great. But think about it another way. That was you at one time. For one way or another, you were disobedient to God. And if you hadn't repented, you would stand before him. And someone looked at you and say, if anyone deserves to go to hell, it's that person. And they're looking at you. Keep that in mind when we begin to judge people. Even when they treat you bad, pray for them. You know what? There's a couple of verses I forgot here. Let's read these last here. Let me go back to verse 45. So Jacob took up a stone. We went back to that. He gathers them together. I forgot to read this part. So they took stones and piled them up in a heap, and they ate there by the heap. So just go back a little bit. When they made this peace agreement, they put up this pillar. Each one gave it a different name. So they took an oath, and at the end they offered a sacrifice in this hill country and invited his relatives to the meal. After they had eaten, they spent the night there. Early the next morning, here, listen to this part. Verse 55. I went through it real quickly. I just forgot to read it. It was out of order. Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then he left and returned home. I missed that important part. They made the agreement, and he did. He knew he wouldn't see them ever again either. But it ends there. They left, and he went home. And it ends the way God wanted to end separation. Sometimes we look at thinking separation is not good. Sometimes God moves us, and we think, this can't be right. If God, for example, a good time to leave a church and to go to another one if God leads you. Remember, I've said this many times. Let's just say Pastor Fred, because he's even in the back. Pastor Fred didn't say hi to me. I was like, he probably didn't even see you. He was thinking. Or they see me. I'm probably talking to one person, and I didn't see you. And you get upset and you leave. Here's the reason. Is God moving you? And here's another thing I don't like. You pour into you guys, and you're being equipped. And God moves you. I was like, they're ready to serve. But God said, I had them here for a season to equip them to go. I pray that God doesn't take too many of you guys. But if he is, that's the way it is, right? But that's the reason to leave. Not to leave because you got emotionally upset. Because if there's an issue you have here or there, it's going to go with you. You need to deal with that issue. Because you just bring it to the next church and upset them and move to the next one and the next one, and you're just hurting yourself. So with that said, let's end with prayer, and then we'll go into prayer. Heavenly Father, I just thank you for this time, Lord. I pray, Lord, as we've heard these words of yours, that they speak to our heart. And I pray, Lord, as I hear, we just need to trust you. And that needs to be, for our own purpose, we can look at our actions and say, are we truly trusting you? And again, if you tell us to do something, Lord, give us the ability to be obedient and not to fear man. Many times in this physical body, we fear man. But you're greater than any man here, anyone, any purpose. So I pray, Lord, just continue to encourage us in this area. We ask all this in Jesus' name.